My name is Jerome Williams, and for 3 years I was Christopher Wallace's personal bodyguard. The world knew him as the Notorious B.I.G, but to me he was just Big, a brilliant, funny, complicated man who needed protection during the most dangerous period in hip-hop history. I'd been working private security for entertainers since the late 1980s, but the East Coast-West Coast hip-hop conflict was unlike anything I'd encountered. This wasn't just about music or business rivalries. By 1996, it had escalated into something that felt like warfare, with real bullets and real bodies. When Biggie's management hired me in 1994, the instructions were clear: keep Christopher Wallace alive, whatever it takes. The tension between East Coast and West Coast rap scenes was intensifying, and Biggie, as one of the biggest names representing New York, was becoming a target. The job required constant vigilance. Death threats were routine. We'd get calls at the studio, letters sent to his home, even confrontations at public events. Some were from gang members, others from rival artists' associates, and many from fans who'd bought into the manufactured drama between coasts. But the real danger wasn't always obvious. It came from the industry itself: record labels, promoters, and behind-the-scenes players who were profiting from the conflict while keeping the artists in harm's way. Working with Biggie taught me that the East Coast-West Coast beef was more complex than media coverage suggested. While journalists focused on Biggie versus Tupac, the real tension involved multiple layers: record label politics, gang affiliations, territorial disputes, and personal grudges that went back years. Biggie understood the danger he was in, but he was also trapped by it. His career depended on maintaining his reputation and responding to challenges, even when those responses put him at risk. As his bodyguard, I had to balance protecting him with allowing him to live and work as a public figure. The relationship between Biggie and Tupac was particularly heartbreaking to witness. They'd been friends, collaborators, and mutual admirers before the conflict tore them apart. Biggie would sometimes talk about the early days, when they'd worked together and genuinely respected each other's artistry. "Pac was my man," Biggie told me during a late-night studio session in 1995. "All this East Coast-West Coast shit, it's bigger than us now. We're just the faces they put on it." But bigger than us didn't make it less dangerous. If anything, it made the threat more unpredictable because the violence wasn't coming from personal animosity between artists. It was being driven by forces that saw Biggie and Tupac as pawns in a larger game. After Tupac was murdered in Las Vegas on September 7, 1996, everything changed. Biggie was devastated by the loss, but he was also terrified that he'd be next. The media and street speculation immediately focused on potential retaliation against East Coast figures, with Biggie at the top of every target list. "They're gonna blame me for Pac's death," Biggie said the day after the shooting. "Even though I had nothing to do with it, I'm gonna be the face they put on it." He was right. Within hours of Tupac's death, rumors spread that Biggie had been involved in the shooting or had prior knowledge of the attack. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter in the atmosphere of paranoia and vengeance that surrounded the hip-hop scene. My job became exponentially more difficult after September 1996. Every public appearance required extensive security planning. We'd scout venues days in advance, coordinate with local law enforcement, and maintain multiple exit strategies. Even routine activities like studio sessions or restaurant visits required careful preparation. But Biggie's career was at its peak, and completely isolating him would have meant destroying everything he'd worked for. We had to find ways to keep him safe while allowing him to continue performing, recording, and promoting his music. The challenge was that threats could come from anywhere. Gang members seeking reputation, rival artists associates, random individuals who'd been influenced by media coverage, or industry figures with their own agendas. We couldn't predict where the next danger would emerge. In early 1997, Biggie was scheduled to travel to Los Angeles to promote his upcoming album Life After Death. Everyone in his inner circle knew this was risky. LA was considered hostile territory for prominent East Coast artists, especially after Tupac's murder had intensified West Coast anger. I strongly advised against the trip. Big, there's no reason for you to be in LA right now. The album can be promoted from New York. The risk isn't worth it. But his record label and management insisted the trip was necessary. There were interviews scheduled, radio appearances, and a party hosted by Vibe magazine that would provide valuable exposure. From a business perspective, they argued, avoiding LA would look like weakness and could damage his career. Biggie was torn. He wanted to honor his professional commitments, but he was also aware of the danger. We spent hours discussing security protocols for the LA trip, planning every detail to minimize risk while fulfilling his obligations. I can't hide forever, he finally decided. If I don't show up in LA, they'll say I'm scared. That'll hurt me more than the physical risk. We arrived in Los Angeles on March 5, 1997. The atmosphere was tense from the moment we landed. Even friendly contacts in the LA music scene warned us to be extra careful. There was talk on the streets about East Coast artists being unwelcome, and several people mentioned that Biggie's presence was stirring up old animosities. The first few days went smoothly. We maintained tight security protocols, limited public appearances, and stayed in controlled environments. Biggie completed his scheduled interviews and radio spots without incident. But I could feel the tension building. On March 8, we attended a party at the Peterson Automotive Museum hosted by Vibe magazine. This was the event his management had insisted was crucial for album promotion. Despite my concerns about the venue and guest list, Biggie was determined to attend. The party itself was relatively uneventful. Biggie mingled with industry figures, posed for photos, and made the appearances his team wanted. But I noticed several individuals who seemed out of place, people who weren't part of the usual entertainment industry crowd, who appeared to be observing rather than celebrating. Around midnight, I decided we'd stayed long enough. Biggie had fulfilled his promotional obligations, and remaining longer only increased our exposure to potential threats. We prepared to leave, following our standard departure protocol. That's when I received the phone call that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was 12:47 a.m. on March 9, 1997. My phone rang as we were walking toward our vehicles in the museum's parking structure. The caller ID was blocked, but I answered because calls during security operations could be important. Jerome? The voice was male, older, with an accent I couldn't immediately place. Who is this? Someone who knows what's about to happen. You need to get Biggie out of LA right now. Tonight. Don't take Wilshire Boulevard. Don't follow your usual route. Go straight to the airport. Who is this? I repeated. How did you get this number? That doesn't matter. What matters is that there are people waiting for him. They know his schedule, they know his route, and they know his security protocols. If you follow your standard departure plan, he's going to die tonight. The line went dead. I stood in the parking structure for several seconds, processing what I'd just heard. My first instinct was to take the warning seriously. In my line of work, you don't ignore potential threats, even from anonymous sources, but several factors made me hesitate. First, we received crank calls and false threats regularly. People would call claiming to have information about plots against Biggie, usually seeking attention or trying to cause panic. Most proved to be hoaxes. Second, the caller hadn't provided specific information about the supposed threat. He'd given general warnings but no details about who, where, or how an attack might occur. Professional threat assessment requires specifics to be actionable. Third, and most importantly, changing our departure plans at the last minute would have required significant logistical adjustments. We'd already coordinated with local security, planned our route, and arranged for backup support. Altering those plans based on an anonymous phone call seemed like an overreaction. I made the decision that still haunts me. I decided the call was probably another false alarm, and we proceeded with our original departure plan. At 12:30 a.m., we left the Vibe party in a convoy of 3 vehicles. Biggie was in the passenger seat of a black GMC Suburban, with his friend and manager Damien D-Rock Butler driving. I was in the lead car, with additional security following behind. We took our planned route along Wilshire Boulevard toward the hotel where Biggie was staying. It was the same route we'd used for previous trips, and it had always been secure. I saw no reason to deviate from a plan that had worked before. At approximately 12:45 a.m., we stopped at a red light at the intersection of Wilshire Boulevard and South Fairfax Avenue. It was a normal traffic stop in a busy area of Los Angeles. Nothing seemed unusual or threatening. That's when I heard the gunshots. 4 rapid shots fired from a dark-colored sedan that had pulled up alongside Biggie's vehicle. The shooter was in the passenger seat, firing through the window directly at the Suburban where Biggie sat. I immediately radioed for emergency assistance and tried to pursue the shooter's vehicle, but it disappeared quickly into LA traffic. By the time I returned to the scene, Biggie was unconscious and bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot wounds. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where doctors worked frantically to save his life. But the damage was too severe. Christopher Wallace was pronounced dead at 1:15 a.m. on March 9, 1997. As I sat in that hospital waiting room, the anonymous phone call played over and over in my mind. Someone had known what was going to happen. Someone had tried to warn us. And I had ignored them. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. I'd been hired to protect Biggie's life, and I'd failed at the most crucial moment. Worse, I'd received specific information that could have prevented his death, and I'd dismissed it. In the days following the murder, I replayed every detail of that phone call. The caller had known our route along Wilshire Boulevard. He'd known our departure timing. He'd known enough about our security protocols to predict exactly how the attack would unfold. This wasn't a random caller making lucky guesses. This was someone with detailed inside information about our plans and the plot against Biggie's life. During the police investigation, I reported the anonymous call to detectives. They were interested but pointed out that the caller's identity couldn't be established, and the information had been too vague to act upon legally, but I knew I should have trusted my instincts. In private security, you're trained to err on the side of caution when it comes to potential threats. Taking that call seriously might have meant changing our route, delaying our departure, or even leaving LA immediately, any of which could have saved Biggie's life. Over the following years, I thought constantly about who that caller might have been. Someone involved in the plot who developed second thoughts? A law enforcement officer who'd learned about the plan but couldn't intervene officially? An industry insider who'd overheard conversations about the intended attack? I'll never know for certain, but I believe someone within the music industry had advanced knowledge of Biggie's murder and tried to prevent it by warning me. The level of detail in that call suggested intimate familiarity with both our security arrangements and the attacker's plans. The East Coast-West Coast conflict claimed two of hip-hop's greatest artists and tore apart a music community that should have been celebrating its creativity and success. Instead of collaborating and building together, the industry allowed manufactured rivalries to escalate into real violence. Biggie's death wasn't just a random act of street violence. It was the result of industry forces that profited from conflict while putting the artists themselves at risk. Record labels, media outlets, and other behind-the-scenes players bear responsibility for creating the atmosphere that made these murders possible. Christopher Wallace was a brilliant artist, a devoted father, and a young man with unlimited potential who died because adults in positions of power failed to protect him from the consequences of their business decisions. I failed to protect him too. Despite receiving a warning that could have saved his life, I chose to follow protocol instead of trusting the information I'd been given. That decision cost Biggie his life and cost the world one of its greatest musical talents. 27 years later, I still wake up some nights replaying that phone call and wondering what would have happened if I'd insisted we take a different route home. Maybe Biggie would still be alive. Maybe hip-hop history would be completely different. Maybe two of the most talented artists of their generation would have lived to create the music the world deserved to hear. I can't change what happened on March 9, 1997. But I can share this story as a warning about the cost of not listening when someone tries to save a life. If you're ever in a position to prevent violence or protect someone from harm, don't hesitate. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about protocols or procedures or whether the information comes from an official source. Trust the warning. Act on the information. Save the life. Because living with the knowledge that you could have prevented a tragedy is a burden no one should have to carry.